welcome to Talent on Tap. I'm Brendan Brown. I work on the recruiting team here at LinkedIn, and I am excited to welcome David and Jonah Stillman to the show. They are the authors of GenZ at Work, which is a very important book on a very important topic for anyone in business today. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
David, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, so my name is David Stillman, and I've been studying the generations for 21 years. I'm the author of When Generations Collide and The M Factor, How the Millennials Are Rocking the Workforce. But I did see a big trend that people were talking so much about millennials that no one was paying attention to Gen Z. The leading edge is already 23, so in studying the generations, I thought it'd be really important to have a voice of that generation. So I invited my son, who at the time was only 16, to join the company, and ever since then, he's been really spearheading a lot of the Gen Z effort.
And I'm Jonah Stillman. I'm an 18-year-old public speaker specializing on the topic of connecting with my generation, Gen Z. As my dad mentioned, the generation after the millennials, and we are drastically different.
So lots of talk about generational shifts over the past decade or so. Define Gen Z for us.
Sure, Gen Z is the generation after the millennials, and the birth years would be 1995 to 2012. So the leading edge is already 23 and gainfully employed.
And your focus is generations at work specifically.
And in the marketplace.
And
so how do we recruit and retain them, or how do we market and sell to the different generations?
Got it. And what are the big traits that are most common amongst this generation?
In our book, GenZ at Work, which was published just over a year ago, we identified the 7 key traits of connecting with Gen Z. And the first one that comes to my mind is that we're a very realistic generation. We're a generation that grew up in a time that necessarily wasn't the prettiest. Our parents, we saw struggles with the economy. We grew up post 9/11. So we're really a generation that's been surrounded by instability and unrest. So therefore, throughout our shopping trends and our workplace attitudes, we are just a very realistic generation at a very young age.
Got it. And say a little bit more about that. Stylistically, what does that mean?
Well, I think a lot of it, where the big surprise to everyone is you compare that to millennials, who grew up, economic expansion, everything was exciting. They had boomer parents telling them, you could be anything you want to be. So a very different message than this generation got, which is more sort of be in survival mode, is what describes more of this generation.
Obviously, you're of this generation. Yeah. Share a little bit of sort of your perspective and your experience. Maybe just share, how do you view things in terms of workplace, or how you like to get work done?
In the workplace, we enter, we're not necessarily as collaborative, we're much more competitive. We don't want anybody's nose in our business. Shockingly, we don't really necessarily like open office concepts. We're more about having our own space where we can, work without having to worry about distractions. So in the workplace, we are a lot different than millennials.
What about communication?
Well, definitely people, when I hear the word communication, they think of the youngest generation. The first thing they think of is cell phones, and all they want to do is text, and they don't want to have in-person communication. But we actually did 3 national studies for the book we wrote, and in the first one we asked, what is the number one way you want to communicate with your peers, your bosses, coworkers, and the number one answer was 84% of Gen Z said they prefer face-to-face communication.
Wow.
One of the other traits we identified is that we live in a phygital world, being that we see no difference between the physical and digital worlds. So therefore, we're looking to do everything in the most fast way possible, in the most effective way possible, in the most, communicative style. So we really are just looking for all different ways to communicate in the workplace.
So collaboration, you said less collaborative than the prior generation. How do you like to collaborate?
I think it's important to understand that Gen Z is not going to be a generation that won't collaborate. It's not like we're not going to work in teams or groups. It's just not as natural to us. Millennials are by far the most collaborative generation. It shows up in the way they socialize, the way they work, the way they interact with social media platforms. The millennial mentality I always say is that if 2 heads is better than 1, they think, 12 may be better than 2. So naturally, Gen Zers are going to be a little bit more competitive. It might not come as natural, where a millennial may say, hey, I'd love to work with you guys on this. We'll just naturally do it by ourselves. We believe, by a massive majority, over 70% of Gen Z believes in the saying, if you want it done right, do it yourself. But I think it's really important that managers in the workplace encourage us to work with groups, encourage us on the value of collaboration, because it won't necessarily come natural to us. But that's not to say when you say, hey, I need you 6 to go work on this, there's a conference room right down there, we will go do it, but naturally we'll defer to doing it ourselves. So I think a lot of encouragement and motivation behind the idea of collaboration will definitely connect.
If I needed to share some feedback with you, how would you want to receive that feedback?
If you're my boss and we're sitting in the same office, instead of maybe going back and forth on 10 emails, maybe just walk over to my desk, ask a question, reconvene at the end of the day, and then we can both go about our business. Because for a couple reasons, it's the most authentic way to communicate in a world where there's so many different ways to communicate. It's hard to tell who's really behind the computer. It really is a great way to build relationships. It's by far the most effective. So we're really just looking to streamline processes. We're really looking to build good relationships in the workplace.
this generation was raised by Gen Xers with very tough, there's winners, there's losers, it's a big world out there, and you're gonna have to fight hard. So you can deliver feedback to them straightforward, to the point, no sugarcoating. That's what they're going to want.
Management is a huge topic in terms of what's happening with each generation.
Smart companies that we're working with around the world right now are saying, wow, we need to prepare our millennials. These are going to be the frontline managers. We see these differences. Huge collisions are on the horizon between millennials and Gen Z. So first of all, it's just preparing millennials. What would I prepare them for is, hey, millennials, you're so collaborative. You like a lot of teamwork. You play to each other's differences. You've now got a workforce that's a little bit more independent, extremely competitive, might even want your job. They're not being defiant. They're not team players, they're just a little bit more independent and competitive, and adjusting for that management style is definitely going to be one of the most important things.
What should people be doing right now to start preparing or whatever it might be as management at a company?
So what I would really be doing is, I'd say, let's, as a company, get proactive here. Let's get to know Gen Z. Doesn't mean, like Jonah said, it's not out with the old and in with the new. It's like, what's coming, where can we adapt to, or where can't we, so we can be ready to talk to Gen Z. We can't bend on this one. We're steady here. And so I would first be proactive and learn about Gen Z and how they're different. But I would really be putting effort into training my millennials. We're not seeing enough companies do that. It's happening at the executive level, but it's not down here with the people who are going to be faced day to day. And the differences between millennials and Gen Z is so vast that I would be putting a lot of my attention in training the frontline managers.
Let's talk a little bit about interview and assessment, because I think that process, generally speaking, at most companies doesn't work that well. So talk a little bit about how you would want to demonstrate your skills.
As more and more Gen Zers apply to work at companies like LinkedIn or wherever it may be, because of our wants from colleges, because of our hyper-customized attitude, you're going to see more and more Gen Zers applying for the same job with a huge range of degrees. You're not going to be as easy to compare candidates anymore. So I would say the more you can get towards showing their personality side of it, not just on paper and written exams, whether it be video resumes or having them in and just putting them in front of the team and having conversations, see how they connect as a person. And maybe not look as much into grades and test scores, but more how you think they will fit in the culture, and really give them a chance to show who they are, not what they can do on paper, is going to be huge, because you're going to have such a wide range of people applying for the same job with different majors, minors, and skill sets.
Talk to me about side hustles.
Well, side hustles, have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
We used to call it moonlighting. You did something on the side, but you never talked about it. What's happened, and we've talked a lot about with Generation Z, is they're in survival mode.
Yeah.
They're super competitive, and technology has really allowed them, to do business. So we've got a generation that, regardless of where they work, they're going to have a side hustle, and that means they'll work full time, but they're going to have something going on the side. Now, there's been a lot of people that will say, hey, Jonah, if you work for me and I walk by your desk at 12 noon and I see you uploading pictures to a website selling stuff, no way. And that's a fair statement, until Jonah comes back with, well, then why is it okay for you to email me 8 o'clock at night and expect an answer? And this gets back to what Jonah's saying earlier about how it's not work-life balance, it's blend. So they're going to come to work, they might be working on their side hustle during the day, but they're working on your job at night. And a lot of people just are not ready for that, and they're going to have it. I think one thing that I would be doing in the recruiting process is get non-competes back on the table. I think non-competes over time have been watered down and kind of aren't paying attention to. If Jonah's working at LinkedIn and he's got a cookie company, probably doesn't matter. But if he's inventing a new social media platform, you probably have an issue. Yeah. So, but they might not see that as much. So I think get the side hustle out there. They're going to have one, and talk about its place in your business.
Well, this has been incredibly informative. I think this is arguably one of the most important topics in the next decade in business. So I appreciate the time you guys have spent with us.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And hopefully we can continue this conversation at some point.
You
Love
bet.
to.
Thanks for joining us. And if you're not paying attention to Gen Z, which is a very important demographic in population of over 70 million up-and-coming professionals, you better get smart, because it's happening now.